Since 1936, the United States had been fielding the M1 Garand as their rifle of choice, American General George Patton describing it as the greatest implement of battle ever devised, and when compared to the bolt-action rifles being fielded by everyone else, it certainly was deserving of such praise. The Garand is a semi-automatic rifle firing the then standard American 30-06 Springfield cartridge out of 8-round en-bloc clips, the clip ejecting upwards with a distinctive ping when empty, and is possibly the most iconic rifle of the war. Over 5 million of these were produced during the war, and its impact on the battlefield was obvious, the higher rate of fire it enabled allowing for the US to gain fire superiority much faster and giving them an edge over their bolt-action equipped enemies. The Americans would attempt to replace the M1 Garand with the M1 Carbine, a weapon designed to be lighter and more maneuverable than the standard issue Garand, production beginning in 1941. Chambered in the .30 Carbine cartridge and with over 6 million produced during the war, the M1 was accurate and effective at up to 270 meters and much easier to handle in close quarters combat than the Garand. But the weapon would not replace the Garand as standard issue, although it would find heavy use with paratroopers, non-commissioned officers, and machine gun crews. For sniping roles, the US employed the time-tested Springfield M1903, a weapon in service since 1903, using its A4 variant. Considered at best a poor excuse for a sniper rifle, the A4 was chambered in 30-06 Springfield and equipped with a 2.75x Weaver 330 scope. It was a hastily put together sniper rifle, just barely accurate at up to 550 meters, and not at all liked by those that used it, but it was more practical to have a serviceable sniper rifle at the start of the war than spend precious time and money developing a designated sniper rifle during it. It wasn't a purpose-built precision rifle, but just an old rifle with a new coat of paint and a scope, but like the Bar, it still did its job, being a viable rifle for sniping if nothing else. For their submachine gun of choice, the US had adopted the Thompson primarily in its M1 and M1A1 variants, though some M1928A1s did see combat. Issued to scouts, patrol leaders, paratroopers, and non-commissioned officers, the Thompson was well liked for its high rate of fire and stopping power, despite previously having a less than savory reputation due to its extensive use by criminals in the 1920s. The first weapon to bear the moniker of submachine gun, the Thompson was chambered for the 45 ACP cartridge, being able to dispense its ammunition at up to 800 rounds per minute. However, the Thompson would be replaced by the M3 grease gun on the front lines in 1944, the M3 being cheaper to produce, also firing the 45 ACP round. The grease gun was initially disliked, but soldiers came to appreciate its size, weight, and ease of maintenance, the weapon having a short but respectable service life on the front lines. As for their machine gun, the Americans stuck with their World War I era Browning automatic rifle. In service since 1918, and standard issue since 1938, this 30-06 chambered machine gun was built to fit the Americans' walking fire concept, soldiers to fire the weapon from the hip while advancing on an objective, but it was seldom used in such a role. The model used in World War II, the M1918A2, came with a bipod for use as the automatic fire support for a 12-man squad, the riflemen carrying extra ammunition for the Bar. It wasn't the best weapon for the job, using small 20-round box magazines, not having an easily changeable barrel, and being difficult to master, but nonetheless it did its part in the war, providing quick bursts of automatic fire and even filling an anti-sniper role by suppressing enemy sniper positions. The US would also heavily employ the belt-fed M1919 Browning on all fronts, primarily in its A4 and A6 variants. The A4 was used by 2 to 3 man machine gun teams, this 30-06 chambered machine gun serving as the squad support weapon for the Americans, often mounted on a tripod or carried via use of a sling. The A6 would fit a role similar to the Bar, having an affixed bipod, buttstock, carrying handle, and a lightened barrel for use as a standard light machine gun. Produced up to 2 million times during the war, the venerable Colt 1911 was the standard sidearm for US soldiers, finding use in large quantities on every front the Americans fought. Mostly issued in its M1911A1 variant, the timeless 45 ACP Classic had been standard issue for the US Armed Forces since 1911, and was showing no signs of slowing down. Many soldiers would not be officially issued a handgun, but would find ways to acquire them with the lax enforcement of regulations in combat zones, those managing to get their hands on one considering themselves fairly lucky. Despite frequent criticism of its size, no one could deny the fearsome stopping power the Browning-designed classic had. For the British, the tried-and-true Lee-Enfield rifle would be their standard issue rifle of choice, the basic design being in service since 1895. For World War II, they developed the Lee-Enfield No.4 Mk.1 rifle, improving the sights, making it more reliable, and bettering its long-range accuracy. Firing out of 10-round box magazines or 5-round clips, a well-trained soldier using this iconic rifle could dispense 20 to 30 rounds of the .303 British cartridge in under a minute. Issued to the British and Commonwealth forces on all fronts, the Lee-Enfield would be produced over 3 million times, and this time-tested design was arguably the best bolt-action rifle fielded during the war. For sniping purposes, the British would again field the Lee-Enfield No.4 Mk.1 rifle, the rifle modified with an addition of a cheek-rising piece, removal of the standard rear sight, and adding telescopic sight mounts for a 3.5x scope. Other than these additions, the rifle would remain the same. In their submachine gun role was the STEN, adopted by the British in 1941 to meet the demands of the armed forces after a massive loss of arms at Dunkirk, and the drying up of the supply of Thompson submachine guns from America. It was a simple, low-cost 9x19mm chambered weapon, capable of firing 500 to 600 rounds per minute and effective at up to 100 meters, but its odd shape and occasionally questionable reliability gave it a poor reputation if not maintained properly. However, a well-maintained and fully functioning STEN was devastating when clearing positions of enemies equipped with bolt-action weapons, and those with the fortune to not experience many jams and stoppages became fond of the weapon. Many variants were produced over the course of the war, the most common being the Mark II and Mark III designs. Britain's machine gun of choice would be the Bren, a design in service since 1937 and known as possibly one of the best machine gun designs of the era. Gas-operated and air-cooled, the Bren was fielded by a two-man crew, one gunner who would fire it and one loader carrying extra ammunition, barrels and a toolkit for field repairs. Firing the .303 British cartridge out of primarily 30-round box magazines, the Bren could unload its ammunition at a rate of up to 520 rounds per minute. Issued one per rifle section, the Bren was generally used from the prone positions with the help of a bipod, or from the hip when on the move via use of a sling, this machine gun design being accurate at up to 550 meters. As for their handgun, the British selected the Enfield No.2 Mk.1, being the only power of World War II to field a revolver as standard instead of a semi-automatic design. Chambered in .38 Smith & Wesson, the Enfield entered service in 1932. This revolver design was robust and reliable in almost any environment, but its heavy trigger pull and noticeable accuracy issues made it less favored than other handgun designs such as the 1911. Nonetheless, the Enfield No.2 was a serviceable handgun with a reliable and mechanically sound design with enough stopping power to be effective if needed for close quarters engagements. While the Enfield was the official standard issue, many soldiers would be issued the Webley Revolver, primarily in its .38 Smith & Wesson chambered Mark IV and .455 Webley chambered Mark VI variants due to a shortage in Enfield handguns. This design had been in service since 1887, being effective at up to 50 meters, and had a reputation for reliability and stopping power. The Soviets, for their standard rifle, selected another trusted weapon from years gone by, the 1891 Mosin-Nagant, in service since 1892, and last updated in 1930 as the 1891/30, shortening it by a few inches, recalibrating the sights, and using a cylindrical rather than hexagonal receiver, the Soviets produced millions of the Imperial Russian rifle. The expedited production of these rifles would lead to several defects, such as a warped stock, but the Nagant remained rugged, reliable, and most importantly, accurate. Chambered in the 7.62x54mm R cartridge, the Mosin fed out of 5-round clips, and this timeless bolt-action design was accurate at up to 500 meters. With around 20 million of the Mosin produced by the end of the war, the rifle became ubiquitous with the Red Army, and was one of the most feared bolt-action rifles of the era. As with the British, the Soviets modified their standard issue rifle for sniping purposes, the Mosin-Nagant having its bolt handle reconfigured to make room for a 3.5 times scope, raising the foresight so the open sights were still useful at up to 600 meters and lightening the trigger pull. The Mosin worked incredibly well as a sniper, being accurate enough to hit targets at around 850 meters, becoming famous for its use in the Battle of Stalingrad and making heroes out of many Soviet snipers. As for their submachine gun, the Soviets chose to use the PPSH-41, arguably the most terrifying Allied submachine gun of the war. Firing the 7.62 by 25mm Tokarev cartridge out of 35-round box magazines, or the less reliable 71-round drums, the PPSH could dispense its ammunition at 900 rounds per minute, making it easily the fastest firing submachine gun design of the war. With an estimated 6 million produced during the course of the war, this submachine gun was cheap and simple, yet still incredibly effective, especially in close quarters fighting. In some cases, the Soviets would equip entire platoons and companies with the PPSH to give them almost unmatched short-range automatic firepower, and during battles such as Stalingrad and Berlin, such an advantage was critical. The Soviet machine gun of choice for World War II would be the DP-27, better known to the Soviet soldiers as the Record Player, due to its top-mounted 47-round Pan magazine. Chambered in the 7.62 by 54mm R cartridge, this rugged and reliable Soviet design had a fire rate of around 550 rounds per minute, being effective at up to 800 meters. Despite being cheap to produce and having a very simple design, the heat produced from sustained automatic fire could warp the operating spring, and the DP-27 only had an automatic fire setting, meaning soldiers had to be incredibly careful when using it. On top of this, the barrel, unlike the majority of machine gun designs by this time, was not changeable. Reloading magazines was often a slow and tedious process, and the weapon was almost entirely useless at hitting targets if not used with its bipod. Nonetheless, the DP-27 and its younger brother the DP-M were used extensively by the Soviets. For their handgun, the Soviets opted for the Tokarev TT-33 pistol, chambered in the same 7.62 by 25mm Tokarev cartridge as the PPSH-41. This short recoil, locked breech weapon was effective at around 50 meters, firing out of 8-round magazines, and despite often being rushed through production, the Tokarev remained accurate, reliable, and more than capable of stopping an enemy, though it did have fairly strong recoil. Along with the Tokarev was the time-tested Nagant M1895 revolver, a 7.62 by 38mm R-chambered 7-shot revolver design that was accurate at up to around 50 meters, one Russian officer supposedly saying if anything went wrong with the M1895, you could fix it with a hammer. The M1895 would be in service initially during the war, but the aforementioned TT-33 would phase it out by 1945. Thank you so very much for watching these videos. Please like and subscribe and comment below what you'd like to see me cover next.